Welcome to At Home with Penguin, with me, Caroline Criado Perez. I hope you all appreciate that I got fully dressed for this. Normally, I only get dressed my top half, but I'm wearing a boiler suit today, so I've also got my bottom half dressed, so that's very exciting. And maybe if you're very well behaved, you'll get to see the whole outfit. Anyway, this is a weekly live series. Each Tuesday, I'm a writer, just FYI, thanks mum, invites you into their home. Just a quick asterisk there, this is not actually my home, but we can go into that later, to share some of our routines, some of the things that bring us comfort at the moment. So as I said, my name is Caroline Criado Perez, and I am a writer and an activist. And the book that I guess I'll mainly be talking about today is called Invisible Women: Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. And basically that book is about the fact that the vast majority of data that we have collected historically and continue to collect, everything from economic data to workplace data to transport data to medical data, which obviously feels quite relevant right now, has been mainly collected on men. And what are the issues that arise from that? So today I'm going to be telling you what I've been up to, share a reading from one of my favorite books, and I'll shortly also be doing a live Q&A. So please do send in your questions in the comments section. Don't post any mean comments because I will cry. Okay, so number one, my daily routine has been, by the way, I have some prompts here for things to talk about. So if that sounds a bit weird, that's what's going on there. My daily routine. So my daily routine has been, well, we start off the day, and I'm not kidding, with yoga. We call it Yoga with Caroline. I hope that doesn't cause copyright issues with Yoga with Adrienne. As I was saying, I'm with my mum. My mum is an amazing woman. She's an aid worker with Médecins Sans Frontières. And for the past 5 months, she has been out in Yemen. Well, actually, not the past 5 months anymore, because she's been back for about a month. But she had been out in Yemen working with Médecins Sans Frontières, and she was getting back at the beginning of March. And my plan had always been to go and visit her. And I ended up just staying here with my boyfriend because she's over 70, and we wanted to be able to go and get stuff for her. So anyway, that is to say that I lead my boyfriend and my mum in yoga every morning. And that has been very interesting. They are sometimes recalcitrant pupils. I'm sure they won't mind my saying. So the daily routine starts with the yoga. I've been trying to do as much exercise as possible. Unfortunately, I'm a runner and I hurt my knee, and that has been a big downer. And if anyone has any suggestions for how I can get my heart rate up while not being able to run, I would be very grateful. I've tried shadow boxing, I've tried circuits, I've tried cycling. None of it is as good as running. I don't understand why. Anyway, so please, anyone wants to send me like my own tailored workout, that would be great. Next prompt, I find I'm spending most of my time in being pissed off about my knee. Also being pissed off about the gender data gap. One of the things that's been quite frustrating about this pandemic, as someone who writes about the failure to collect sex disaggregated data, has been the failure to collect sex disaggregated data during this pandemic, particularly given it's so clear that COVID-19 does have a sex-specific response. You know, one of the things that is very, very clear is that more men are dying. The problem is we aren't collecting good enough data for us to know exactly why that is. To what extent is it behavior-based, so gender, and to what extent is it just pure biological, physiological responses, so sex. To be able to answer that question properly, we need to have data on who is getting tested, who is testing positive, and of course the death rate. And most countries are just not collecting that systematically. So it's very, very hard to get a good idea on that. The other issue, of course, is government policy, as ever, not taking gender into account, which can cause all sorts of other issues. So one obvious one being domestic violence not having been factored into lockdown measures, and how people who were experiencing domestic violence, which is overwhelmingly women, were going to be able to, escape from their abusers or cope with the fact that they were going to be locked up with their abusers. Who did they have to turn to for help? Were the key workers who were going to be allowed to send their children to school, did that include domestic violence workers? All these kinds of gaps. So that's what I'm spending most of my time doing, getting frustrated with the government response and trying to address those gaps, I guess. Um, oh, I can't say what I'm grateful for. So, oh my God, someone just spoke in my ear and you didn't hear that. I'm really sorry. That sounds really weird. Well, I just want to quickly say what I'm grateful for, which is, wait for it. Ta-da! My little doggy Poppy, who everyone is a big fan of, I'm sure. I just want to say one more thing, which we can probably return to in the which is the issue of personal protective equipment. And that's the thing that is really keeping me motivated right now to keep hammering on the issue of sex in this pandemic, because the issue there is that the majority of frontline, particularly healthcare workers, are going to be exposed to the high spiral loads of COVID-19, which we know can result in the more serious cases, are having to use personal protective equipment that has not been designed for their bodies. And that is a huge issue that I've been trying desperately to get the government and the media to pay attention to. And I really hope that everyone watching here will help draw attention to that. Anyway, so I've been told to shut up and start talking about books. So here we go. So the question, I think, is what have you been reading recently? Could you nod? Yes, thank you. So what I've been reading recently, weirdly, I don't know how weird it is. I'd be interested to know if you guys have also been doing this, but I have found myself being very drawn to pandemic fiction, which is probably says something very, very bad about me. But I started reading Stephen King's The Stand recently, which is terrifying, but thoroughly recommend if you like a good bit of pandemic fiction and terrifying yourself. And also the first book that I immediately went back to when this all started to seem really serious was Margaret Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy, which is one of my favorite series of books, yes. And basically it is about a disease, a huge disease outbreak that wipes out most of humanity. But it's about much more than that, of course, it being by Margaret Atwood. And it's just so fantastic on gender, and it's so fantastic on class, and on economics, and on environmentalism. It's really an environmental dystopia, essentially. So I'm just going to read a little bit of that to you now. And here is I can't really see what I'm doing here. Here is the cover, Oryx and Crake. See, because I'm at my mum's house, I don't have access to my beautiful, wonderful library, in which, of course, I have a hard copy of this. Anyway, so settle down, children. It's time for a reading. So this is near the beginning of the book, and we're going to hear about Jimmy, who is introduced to us first as Snowman. And he thinks he is the only person to have survived this disease outbreak that he thinks has wiped out the entire of humanity. And he is sort of reminiscing over his past, where he used to live with his scientist parents in one of the corporations that now runs the world instead of governments. And these are sort of scientific corporations. When Jimmy was really little, they'd lived in a Cape Cod style frame house in one of the modules. There were pictures of him in a carry-cot on the porch, with dates and everything stuck into a photo album at some time when his mother was still bothering. But now they lived in a large Georgian centre plan with an indoor swimming pool and a small gym. The furniture in it was called reproduction. Jimmy was quite old before he realised what this word meant, that for each reproduction item there was supposed to be an original somewhere, or there had been one, or something. The house, the pool, the furniture all belonged to the Organ Inc. compound, where the top people lived. Increasingly, the middle range execs and the junior scientists lived there too. Jimmy's father said it was better that way because nobody had to commute to work from the modules. Despite the sterile transport corridors and the high-speed bullet trains, there was always a risk when you went through the city. Jimmy had never been to the city. He'd only seen it on TV. Endless billboards and neon signs and stretches of buildings, tall and short, endless dingy-looking streets, countless vehicles of all kinds, some of them with clouds of smoke coming out the back, thousands of people hurrying, cheering, rioting. There were other cities too, near and far. Some had better neighbourhoods in them, said his father, almost like the compounds, with high walls around the houses, but those didn't get on TV much. Compound people didn't go to the cities unless they had to. and then never alone. They called the cities the pleblands. Despite the fingerprint identity cards now carried by everyone, public security in the pleblands was leaky. There were people cruising around in those places who could forge anything and who might be anybody, not to mention the loose change, the addicts, the muggers, the paupers, the crazies. So it was best for everyone at organic farms to live all in one place with foolproof procedures. Outside the organic walls and gates and searchlights, things were unpredictable. Inside, they were the way it used to be when Jimmy's father was a kid, before things got so serious, or that's what Jimmy's father said. Jimmy's mother said it was all artificial, it was just a theme park, and you could never bring the old ways back. But Jimmy's father said, why knock it? You could walk around without fear, couldn't you? Go for a bike ride, sit at a sidewalk cafe, buy an ice cream cone. Jimmy knew his father was right because he himself had done all of these things. Still, the corpsicle men, the ones Jimmy's father called our people, these men had to be on constant alert. When there was so much at stake, there was no telling what the other side might resort to. The other side, or the other sides, it wasn't just one side you had to watch out for. Other companies, other countries, various factions and plotters. There was too much hardware around, said Jimmy's father. Too much hardware, too much software, too many hostile bioforms, too many weapons of every kind, and too much envy and fanaticism and bad faith. Long ago, in the days of knights and dragons, the kings and dukes had lived in castles with high walls and drawbridges and slots on the ramparts, so you could pour hot pitch on your enemies, said Jimmy's father, and the compounds were the same idea. Castles were for keeping you and your buddies nice and safe inside, and for keeping everyone else outside. So, are we the kings and dukes? Asked Jimmy. Oh, absolutely, said his father, laughing. Okay, so now the moment you've all been waiting for. I'm going to be taking some of your chat questions, which are being shown on my screen. So do keep asking questions in the comments as you're watching, and I'm going to answer as many as I can. So what do you think the implications are going to be? Digital education technology for young women in the wake of coronavirus. Goodness gracious me, Ellie Mae McDonald. Yeah, well, I mean, for young women, I suppose you mean by that the young women who are going to be receiving the digital education rather than necessarily the young women who are going to be having to give out the education. So, I mean, there's two results of moving towards this sort of digital education technology and learning from home, and that is which is the parent that is most likely to be having to make sure that this schooling actually takes place. And as a result, which is the parent who is going to be having to take a hit on their own career, their own income. And the reality is that it's most likely to be the woman in a heterosexual partnership. And that's for a number of reasons. One, just women tend to be earning less. So when any partner has to make some kind of sacrifice that's going to affect the family economically, it makes sense generally to choose the partner that is going to that is already earning less, and which is one of the ways that we end up with the gender pay gap, is that these kinds of decisions at a micro level all feel like they make sense to the family, but at a macro level they end up with women having much less economic power, on the large scale. And the other reason, of course, is that, if women are already doing the majority of the unpaid care work, which most women are, it again sort of makes sense that this is something that they'll add on to their roles. If you're talking specifically about young women who are going to be receiving education in this way, that's a really interesting question that I hadn't actually thought about. I'm not sure exactly what the gender implications of that might be, but it would be really interesting to study it, because all sorts of things do occur to me. Like, for example, in a co-ed school, if girls normally feel sort of nervous about putting up their hands to speak in front of a class with boys in it, will this change things for them? Will they feel more able to speak up or not? Similarly, questions about the type of marks that girls will get given when they, depending on how much they participate in class. So I'm not sure that we have enough research to be able to say that, because obviously this is a really new situation, but certainly it would be interesting to see if there are any different gender dynamics there. What implications, for better or worse, workplace culture can you see for women post COVID-19? Well, there are concerns, of course, that it's going to be a lot worse, just because of what I've just been talking about, that as women are going to be taking a bigger financial hit, because they're the ones who are more likely to be sacrificing their career in order to educate their children. There is a concern that the gender pay gap will get worse, and of course reporting on that has been suspended for the time being. So that is a worry. And also there's a worry that, you know, women, for example, who are pregnant are going to just lose their jobs. There are all sorts of concerning implications where the people who it is easiest to get rid of will end up being women. On the other hand, there is a possibility, and this is what I would really like to focus on, and I guess this goes back a little bit to one of the earlier sort of prompts for discussion being what is keeping you motivated right now, is the possibility for us to build something better out of this. What do I mean by that? Well, essentially that we are seeing how important so much of the work that until now has been underpaid, insecure, and sort of that has not been appreciated, underappreciated is the word that I'm going for, until now, part of it which has been done by women. Women dominate amongst the low pay. They dominate amongst those on 0-hour contracts. They dominate amongst those who are paid so little that they don't even qualify for statutory sick pay. And a lot of those workers are frontline workers who we are now seeing as absolutely essential. And I guess I hope that we have this opportunity now to recognize how poorly we've structured our society and how little support we have given to these absolutely crucial workers without whom none of us can continue. You know, they have to keep working. We aren't able to carry on a society without them. So I suppose there is a hope there that, you know, when we think about care workers, for example, who are amongst some of the lowest paid, that this will mark a watershed in how we see them, how we treat them, and how we pay them. So positives and negatives. I think that on the whole, it's probably not going to be great for women, because what generally happens in a crisis situation is we start to think of gender issues as a kind of luxury concern. Now, they absolutely are not. And just the fact that there is a very clear sex dimension to what is going on with COVID should make it very, very clear that gender is not a luxury. It is something absolutely crucial that needs to be included and factored into all the decisions that are being made right now. But nevertheless, we are already seeing people saying that, people in charge saying that we just don't have time to think about gender right now. And that inevitably is going to seep into workplace culture. And so that is a concern. But as I said, on the other hand, there is this highlighting of this incredibly important work that a lot of women have been doing without anyone seeing it. And hopefully now's the time that that can change. So that is another, I mean, it's a very, very good example of why it matters that gender is factored into any government response. Sorry, I'm trying to get away from the question, and there's a delay, so it's hard to tell if I'm moving the computer in the right direction. Oh God, I've done that wrong. Okay, sorry. Yeah, what's really frustrating about that is that anyone who knows anything about gender knew that this would happen. This always happens during any kind of crisis situation. Domestic violence rates go up. They go up during war. They go up during disease outbreak. This is something that we just know. And the fact that the government did not account for it in their policy making is, another example of how frustrating it has been to watch what this government has been doing, because they haven't been thinking about these issues. And so the problem is something that is almost of our own making. If you know that something's going to happen, you devise policy to account for it. You make clear what the options are for women who are in abusive relationships, and also you go out of your way to address them. Most of these women are not unknown to social services or to the police, but they've been kind of left on their own to struggle on with this. And meanwhile, we have seen around the world rates of domestic violence that are reported. Now, that's an important distinction, because this domestic violence was already going on, right? What's happened is an escalation. There is no man who is suddenly going to start being abusive to his partner just because of coronavirus. This is a man who was already being abusive, but perhaps she was managing it, was thinking she could cope with it. And as a result of being in lockdown and therefore in a house with this man 23 hours out of 24, she suddenly is very scared and needs help. So, yeah, I guess my thoughts are it's been mishandled, and it's frustrating because it doesn't need to be. I'm afraid there isn't really a quick way to tackle them. These are really long-term issues. And for some of the problems that I talk about in the book, it will take decades before we have data to be able to address the problem. If you look at something like occupational health research, well, the diseases that result from an unsafe workplace often take decades to show up. And if you haven't been collecting the data previously, which we haven't for women, so for example, the vast majority of occupational health research has been done in male-dominated occupations. And I specify that because even when research was being done in these occupations and there were women working in the occupations, the data collected on women was excluded as a confounding factor. So we know almost nothing about female bodies and female-dominated occupations. And it takes a long time for example, cancer to be caused by exposure to chemicals. So that's going to take a long time. What we can do now is start collecting the data. Now, of course, I don't want to be too doom and gloom, because there are things, of course, that can be done much more quickly. So return to the PPE issue, women's faces are just there, for the measuring. So it's not difficult to gather data on a whole bunch of female faces and disaggregate it by ethnicity, for example, because that is another issue that has risen up, that it's not just women who are less likely to find a mask that actually fits them. It is also ethnic minorities, because essentially the masks have been designed for a Caucasian male face. And there can be differences not only in sex, but also in ethnicity when it comes to face shape. But anyway, so that's something that could be solved pretty quickly. That's just a question of political will. So how do we tackle something like that quickly? Well, we put a hell of a lot of pressure on governments. We alert the media to this issue and we get them to start asking questions. So, it depends on the issue. Some things are really a matter of political will. Another one that springs to mind is car safety. So for those of you who haven't read my book, one of the things I address is that cars are much less safe for women. Women are 17% more likely to die if they're in a car crash, and 47% more likely to be seriously injured. And essentially, it is because of the way that cars have been designed to make themselves safe for an average man. The average man has been used as a stand-in for the average human, which is essentially basically what my book is about. That too often we think of the average male as the average human, and that leads to all these various issues. And one of them, of course, is car safety. Now, again, women's bodies exist. It wouldn't be that difficult to collect that kind of data, but it does require a whole lot of people coming together: car manufacturers, regulators, politicians, biomechanics, engineers, and agreeing on a way forward and a way to address it. Just so you are aware, by the way, an average female car crash test dummy does not exist. There is a very scaled down dummy, which is about the size of a 12-year-old child, which is called a female car crash test dummy. But it's not used in most of the tests anyway. In fact, in the frontal collisions, it's only used in the passenger seat, which is fun. So yeah, it's a mixture of political will, and some things are just going to take some time, unfortunately. What book that you've read do you wish you'd written? Ooh, that is a good question. Ooh, probably Margaret Atwood. I just think she's great. I wish I could write fiction like her, because I actually really think that, I'm not sure if I should say this, my publisher will probably kill me, but I think fiction is much more important than nonfiction. Because I think that with nonfiction, you can make a really important argument, and it's important, but also it's much harder, I think, to change people's minds with nonfiction. You know, you have to go into it with a deliberately open mind. And for example, there are people who will just never read my book because they think that's written by that stupid woman that I hate. I'm never going to read that book. Whereas you can write a work of fiction and smuggle in all this really subversive stuff, you know, really great, let's say, gender analysis. And people don't realize that they're being educated while they're reading, that they're being forced to think about, like, well, to go back to the Margaret Atwood example, they're being forced to think about things like the environment. They're being forced to think about things like class. They're being forced to think about things like technology, wrapped up in this very appealing package that you want to read. And I just think that that's so incredibly powerful. You know, another example was being Jane Austen, who was incredibly subversive, but she wrapped it up in this sort of very nice parcel of, we're talking about lovely women getting married, but actually she was just massively poking fun and creating this huge satire out of the whole marriage meat market for women, and talking about how restricted choices were. So I just hugely admire fiction writers, and I think they're incredible, and I wish I could do that. Okay, so this is the penultimate question, I've just been told. So there's one more question after this. So, do I have any upcoming projects inserting women into previously and still hyper masculine spaces? Well, that's a very quick answer. No, I don't. I mean, I'm assuming from that you're talking about a specific campaign. I don't have any specific campaigns. And the reason for that is that I never plan my campaigns. They just happen out of sheer rage. If something comes to my mind and I just think this is just so stupid, it shouldn't be like that. But I suppose, I mean, I kind of consider Invisible Women to be an ongoing campaign, an ongoing movement. It's not just a book to me. It really is it's a change I'm trying to make in society, and I'm not going to let go until it's finished, which inevitably means I'll be doing it until I'm dead, because there's no way it's going to be fixed before I die. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. What breed is your dog, and what is its name? Well, Poppy is well, she's a mutt, the best mutt in the world, and she's a mixture of King Charles Spaniel, Jack Russell, and Chihuahua, which I have called a King Jack Wawa. So that is what Poppy is. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I kind of did. So just to remind you, the book that I've been reading that I recommend you read is Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood. It is one of a trilogy. Actually, my favorite in the trilogy is the next one, The Year of the Flood. Probably just showing my biases there. It focuses more on the experience of women. And Margaret Atwood is just so good at getting across the experience of women and framing things, like I was saying about the whole fiction thing and how they get across. She'll just, a little aside, and you just think that's exactly what it's like to experience that as a woman. She's just great. Anyway, so that's been me. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope, it says here, I hope you choose to read my comfort book. And I should just stress, Oryx and Crake is very much not a comfort book. If you want to read a comfort book, read Nancy Mitford, which I do also recommend. I bloody love Nancy Mitford. But just right now, I want to read about pandemics. Make of that what you will. Anyway, I would love to hear what you think about Oryx and Crake if you do read it, or Nancy Mitford. You can find me on Instagram at Criado Perez. You can find me on Twitter at Criado Perez. You can see I'm very, very original and imaginative. At Home with Penguin will continue every Tuesday, so do check Penguin's social media for the full lineup and tune back in next week. Until then, I'm heading offline and spending my evening with a book. This book in particular being Stephen King's The Stand, which, despite it terrifying me, I can't seem to put down. So yeah, I hope you spend your evening with a book too, specifically a book called Invisible Women. Really great read. It's one of those, it's bestseller. You know, the masses can't be wrong. Anyway, take care of yourselves and happy reading, and thank you for joining me.